When Sarah Mitchell's hiking boots slipped on that loose rock, she thought her biggest worry would be a twisted ankle. She had no idea she was about to face 72 hours that would test every survival instinct she never knew she had. Armed with nothing but a half-empty water bottle, granola bars, and a determination forged by raising 3 kids as a single mother, Sarah was about to discover that sometimes the most ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. This is the true story of how a weekend nature photographer became a wilderness survivor, and how 3 simple words, stay awake, breathe, became her lifeline through the darkest nights of her life. The morning sun painted the Colorado Rockies in shades of gold and amber as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her camera strap and checked her hiking boots one final time. At 42, she had finally carved out time for herself after years of putting her children first. This weekend photography trip to Rocky Mountain National Park was supposed to be her reward. 2 days of capturing nature's beauty through her lens, far from the endless demands of single motherhood. Sarah had planned this trip meticulously. She studied the trail maps, checked weather forecasts, and even bought new hiking gear with money she had saved for months. The Emerald Lake Trail was marked as moderate difficulty, perfect for someone with her basic hiking experience. She packed her day pack with what seemed like enough supplies: 2 water bottles, energy bars, a first aid kit, rain jacket, and, of course, her beloved Canon camera that had been her grandfather's gift. The trailhead buzzed with early morning activity. Families prepared for day hikes, while serious mountaineers shouldered massive packs for multi-day adventures. Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement as she signed the trail register. She had told her sister Beth about her plans, mentioning she would be back by Sunday evening. Beth had worried about Sarah hiking alone, but Sarah had insisted she needed this solitude. The first 2 miles of the trail wound through dense pine forests, and Sarah found her rhythm quickly. The camera clicked constantly as she captured dewdrops on spiderwebs, the play of sunlight through the canopy, and a curious chipmunk that seemed unafraid of her presence. The autumn air was crisp and clean, filling her lungs with an energy she had forgotten existed beneath the stress of daily life. By mid-morning, Sarah reached the first landmark, a small wooden bridge crossing a rushing creek. She paused to rest and check her map. According to the trail guide, she was making good time. The path ahead would climb more steeply toward Bear Lake, where she planned to spend the afternoon photographing the changing aspen leaves reflected in the still water. It was here that Sarah made her first mistake. Eager to capture a shot of the creek from a different angle, she spotted what looked like a game trail leading down to a rocky outcropping near the water. The unofficial path appeared well worn, and she could see other photographers had used it before. There were obvious spots where tripods had been set up. Sarah carefully picked her way down the slope, testing each step. The outcropping provided a perfect vantage point for photographing the creek's cascade over moss-covered boulders. She spent nearly an hour there, lost in the meditative process of composition and light. The photos were some of the best she had ever taken. When she finally climbed back up to what she thought was the main trail, Sarah realized something was wrong. The path looked different, narrower, less maintained. But she could see boot prints in the dirt, so she assumed it was just a section of trail she had not noticed on her way down. She consulted her map, but the dense tree cover made it difficult to get oriented. For the next hour, Sarah followed what she believed was the trail, but nagging doubts grew stronger with each step. The path seemed to be heading downhill when it should have been climbing toward Bear Lake. The boot prints she had been following disappeared completely. When she reached for her phone to check her GPS, her heart sank, no signal. Sarah stopped and forced herself to think clearly. She was a project manager by profession, trained to solve problems systematically. She pulled out her map and tried to identify landmarks, but the endless repetition of pine trees and rocky outcroppings all looked the same. The smart thing would be to turn around and retrace her steps, but she had been walking for over an hour, on what she now suspected was the wrong path. The afternoon sun was getting lower, and Sarah realized she had been hiking for nearly 6 hours. Her water was running low, and she had eaten most of her snacks. More concerning, she had no idea which direction would lead her back to the main trail. The forest that had seemed so welcoming in the morning now felt vast and intimidating. As panic began to creep in, Sarah forced herself to remember the wilderness safety course she had taken years ago when the kids were in Scouts. The most important rule was to stay calm and avoid making the situation worse. She found a large boulder and sat down to assess her situation objectively. She had approximately 1 water bottle left, 3 energy bars, and about 4 hours of daylight. Her rain jacket would provide some warmth, but she had not packed for an overnight stay. Her phone had no signal, but the battery was still good. She could use its flashlight if needed, though she would need to conserve power. Sarah made a decision that would prove crucial to her survival. Instead of continuing to wander randomly, she would stay put and try to signal for help. She had read that most lost hikers are found within a few miles of where they first became lost. Moving randomly would only take her further from the search area. She began by creating visual signals. Using rocks, she built an arrow on the boulder pointing toward the direction she had come from, in case rescuers found this spot. She tied her bright red bandana to a tree branch where it would be visible from multiple directions. Then she began the systematic process of trying to attract attention. Every 15 minutes, Sarah would blow 3 sharp blasts on the emergency whistle attached to her keychain, the universal signal for help. Between whistle signals, she would call out as loudly as she could, then listen carefully for any response. The forest seemed to swallow her voice, returning only the sound of wind through pine needles and the distant chatter of squirrels. As the sun sank lower, the temperature began to drop noticeably. Sarah pulled on her rain jacket and wool hat, grateful she had packed them even though the morning had been warm. She rationed herself to small sips of water and half an energy bar, knowing she might need to make her supplies last much longer than planned. The first night was the hardest thing Sarah had ever experienced. She had found a spot between 2 large boulders that provided some wind protection and gathered pine needles to create insulation from the cold ground. But sleep was nearly impossible. Every sound made her heart race. Was that footsteps? Or just an animal foraging? The temperature dropped into the 30s, and despite her layers, Sarah shivered uncontrollably for hours. To keep herself awake and alert, Sarah began talking to herself, reciting everything she could remember about survival. She thought about her children, Emma, 12 and starting to show signs of teenage independence, Jake, 10 and obsessed with soccer, and little Mia, just 8 and still needing bedtime stories. The thought of never seeing them again was unbearable, so she pushed it away and focused on practical concerns. She knew dehydration was her biggest immediate threat. Her remaining water would last maybe another day if she was careful. After that, she would need to find a water source or risk serious health problems. Food was less critical in the short term, but her energy levels would suffer if she did not eat. As the first grey light of dawn filtered through the trees, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and dread. She had survived one night, but how many more could she endure? She forced herself to eat a small portion of energy bar and take a careful sip of water, then resumed her signaling routine. The second day brought new challenges. Sarah's initial confidence that she would be quickly found began to waver as hours passed with no sign of rescuers. She realized that her absence might not even be noticed until Sunday evening, when she failed to return home. That meant she could be out here for another full day before anyone started looking for her. The psychological battle was as difficult as the physical one. Sarah found herself cycling between hope and despair, determination and panic. When dark thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, she would force herself to focus on concrete tasks. Improving her shelter, practicing whistle signals, or scanning the horizon for any sign of help. By the second afternoon, Sarah's water was nearly gone. She knew she had to find a source soon, or face serious consequences. Using logic and her faint memory of topographic maps, she reasoned that water would flow downhill toward valleys. Against every instinct that told her to stay put, Sarah made the difficult decision to move. She carefully marked her current location with rock cans and strips of fabric torn from her spare shirt, creating a trail that search teams might follow. Then she began working her way downhill, stopping frequently to listen for the sound of running water. It was nearly sunset when Sarah finally heard it, the blessed sound of a creek flowing somewhere below her position. Fighting through thick underbrush, she followed the sound until she reached a small stream tumbling over rocks toward an unseen valley. The water was clear and cold, flowing steadily despite the dry autumn season. Sarah knew she was taking a risk drinking untreated water, that dehydration was a more immediate threat than waterborne illness. She drank deeply, feeling life flow back into her body with each swallow. She refilled her bottles and drank again, then began following the creek downstream, reasoning that water always led towards civilization. The creek led her through terrain that seemed untouched by human presence. Ancient pines towered overhead, their trunks so massive that Sarah could not wrap her arms around them. In other circumstances, she would have found the wilderness cathedral beautiful. Now it felt like a maze designed to keep her forever lost. As darkness fell on her second night, Sarah found herself in a small clearing where the creek formed a pool. She gathered dead wood for a fire, grateful for the practical skills her father had taught her during childhood camping trips. The flames provided both warmth and psychological comfort, creating a bubble of safety in the vast darkness. Sitting by the fire, Sarah reflected on how much her perspective had changed in just 2 days. Concerns that had seemed overwhelming at home, work deadlines, bills, her ex-husband's criticism of her parenting, now felt trivial compared to the basic challenge of staying alive. She found strengths she had not known she possessed, drawing on reserves built through years of handling crises as a single mother. The fire also served a practical purpose. Sarah kept it burning all night, feeding it carefully rationed wood and hoping its glow might be visible to search aircraft. She dozed fitfully between wood-gathering trips, never sleeping deeply enough to let the flames die completely. When morning came again, Sarah faced a critical decision. She could continue following the creek, hoping it would lead to a road or trail. Or she could try to climb to higher ground where she might spot landmarks or signs of civilization. Both options carried risks, but staying put no longer seemed viable. She chose to continue downstream, but with a modification to her strategy. Every few hundred yards, she would climb to the highest point she could manage and scan the landscape for anything man-made, power lines, roads, buildings, or clear-cuts that might indicate human activity. It was during one of these reconnaissance climbs that Sarah first heard the sound that would change everything. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors echoing off the valley walls. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to the highest rock she could reach, frantically waving her red bandana and shouting at the top of her lungs, even though she knew the aircraft was still too far away to see her. The helicopter passed without spotting her, but Sarah was not discouraged. Its presence meant that people were looking for her, that her sister had reported her missing, that professional search and rescue teams were deployed in the area. She just had to make sure they could find her. Sarah spent the rest of that morning preparing for the next aircraft. She gathered green pine boughs and dry grass, creating a smoke signal that she could light quickly when she heard engines. She found the largest open area near the creek and used rocks to spell out SOS in letters large enough to be visible from the air. She positioned herself where she had clear views of the sky in multiple directions and waited. The waiting was agony. Every distant sound made her heart race. Was that an engine or just wind through the trees? Several times she prepared to light her signal fire, only to realize the sound was natural. But Sarah had learned patience through necessity, and she maintained her vigilant watch. It was mid-afternoon when she heard them again. Multiple aircraft this time, definitely helicopters, and they seemed to be conducting a systematic search pattern. Sarah lit her smoke signal and began the most important performance of her life, jumping, waving, and shouting with every ounce of energy she possessed. The first helicopter passed overhead without stopping, and Sarah's heart sank. But minutes later, a second aircraft appeared, flying lower and slower. This time, when Sarah waved her bandana, the helicopter suddenly changed course, circling back toward her position. The helicopter's rotors created a hurricane of pine needles and debris as it circled overhead. Sarah continued waving frantically, tears streaming down her face, as the aircraft slowly descended toward the small clearing she had prepared. She could see the pilot through the cockpit window, talking rapidly into his radio, while a rescuer in the passenger seat gestured toward her position. The helicopter could not land in the dense forest, but it hovered low enough for the rescuer to drop a radio down to Sarah on a long line. Her hands shook as she grabbed the device and pressed the talk button. "This is Sarah Mitchell," she shouted over the rotor noise. "I've been lost for 3 days." "Sarah, this is Mountain Rescue Team 7, came the calm, professional voice through the radio. "We've been looking for you since yesterday. Are you injured? Do you need immediate medical assistance?" Sarah quickly assessed herself. She was dehydrated, exhausted, and had some cuts and bruises from bushwhacking through underbrush, but nothing life-threatening. "I'm okay," she replied. "Tired and thirsty, but I can walk." "Outstanding. We're going to guide you to a landing zone about half a mile downstream. Can you follow the creek and meet our ground team there?" The rescuer dropped down a small pack containing water, energy bars, and an emergency beacon that would allow them to track her movement. Sarah clipped the beacon to her pack and began following their directions, guided by the helicopter overhead. The half-mile walk felt like the longest of her entire ordeal. Now that rescue was certain, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Her legs trembled with each step, and she had to stop frequently to rest. The helicopter crew maintained radio contact, offering encouragement and guidance around obstacles. When Sarah finally reached the designated landing zone, a meadow where the creek curved through an opening in the forest, she found a ground rescue team already waiting. EMT Jennifer Walsh immediately began checking her vital signs while team leader Marcus Rodriguez asked gentle questions about her experience. "You did everything right," Marcus told her, as the medical team started an IV to address her dehydration. Staying in one area, creating signals, conserving your resources, textbook survival behavior. A lot of people panic and make their situation worse, but you kept your head. The helicopter ride back to civilization was surreal. Sarah watched the vast wilderness scroll beneath her, amazed at how large and trackless it appeared from the air. She could see why ground searchers might have taken days to find her without the aerial advantage. The forest stretched for miles in every direction, broken only by occasional rock faces and alpine lakes. At the medical center, Sarah was treated for mild dehydration and exposure. Her children arrived within hours, driven up from Denver by her sister Beth, who had indeed reported her missing when she failed to return Sunday evening. The reunion was emotional. Emma, usually too cool to show affection, clung to her mother and cried, while Jake peppered her with questions about her adventure, and little Mia simply refused to let go of Sarah's hand. "I thought we lost you forever," Beth whispered as they embraced. "When you didn't come home, and then the rangers found your car at the trailhead but no sign of you on the trail." Sarah learned that the search had involved over 30 volunteers from multiple rescue organizations, plus helicopter and ground teams from the National Park Service. The operation had cost thousands of dollars and put other rescuers at risk. She felt simultaneously grateful and guilty about the resources expended on her behalf. Detective Ray Campbell from the Park Service conducted a brief interview to document what had happened. His questions helped Sarah piece together her mistakes: the unauthorized detour to photograph the creek, the wrong turn when she climbed back up, her decision to continue on an unfamiliar path instead of immediately retracing her steps. "The important thing is that you survived and everyone's safe," Detective Campbell assured her. "We see cases like this several times a year. The wilderness doesn't forgive small mistakes, but you handled a dangerous situation better than most people would." During her recovery at the medical center, Sarah found herself replaying the experience obsessively. The physical challenges had been significant: the cold, hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. But the psychological battle had been even more difficult. She had faced fundamental questions about her will to live, her responsibilities to her children, and her ability to handle a crisis completely on her own. In quiet moments, Sarah realized that something profound had shifted inside her during those 3 days. She had always seen herself as someone who needed help, who relied on others for support and guidance. Single motherhood had often felt overwhelming, and she frequently doubted her ability to handle major challenges alone. But the wilderness had stripped away all external support systems, leaving only her own resources and determination. She had discovered reserves of strength, patience, and problem-solving ability that she had not known existed. The woman who emerged from the forest was fundamentally different from the one who had entered it. The children stayed close to Sarah during her overnight observation at the medical center. Emma, usually absorbed in her phone and friends, seemed to see her mother with new eyes. "You were really brave out there," she said quietly. "I don't think I could have done what you did." Jake was fascinated by the survival aspects of her story. "Did you really make a fire with just matches? And you found water by following the sound? That's like in the Army survival movies." But it was Mia's simple statement that affected Sarah most deeply. "I knew you would come back, Mommy. You always take care of us." The responsibility implicit in those words was both comforting and overwhelming. Sarah realized that her survival had not been just about her own life, but about her role as the anchor point for 3 young lives who depended on her completely. Dr. Sandra Kim, the emergency physician overseeing Sarah's care, spent time discussing the psychological impact of survival experiences. "What you went through is traumatic, even though it ended well," she explained. "Some people develop anxiety about outdoor activities, while others become almost addicted to wilderness challenges. It's normal to have strong emotional reactions as you process what happened." Sarah found herself somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. She did not want to avoid the outdoors. If anything, she felt a deeper appreciation for nature's power and beauty. But she also had a newfound respect for wilderness dangers and her own limitations. The local media picked up the story, and Sarah found herself uncomfortable with the attention. Reporters wanted to focus on dramatic elements: the cold nights, the fear, the moment of rescue. But Sarah felt that the real story was more internal. The discovery of inner strength, the clarification of priorities, and the deep appreciation for elements of life she had previously taken for granted. "I don't feel like a hero," she told one persistent journalist. "I just did what I had to do to get home to my kids." Any mother would have done the same thing. But Marcus Rodriguez disagreed when he visited her before she was discharged. "Survival isn't about being a hero," he said. "It's about making good decisions under pressure, staying calm when everything goes wrong, and never giving up hope. You did all of those things when it mattered most." As Sarah prepared to return home, she reflected on the practical lessons she had learned. She would never again hike alone without telling someone her exact route and expected return time. She would carry proper overnight gear even on day hikes, including a sleeping bag, water purification tablets, and more food than she thought she needed. But the deeper lessons were about self-reliance and confidence. The voice in her head that had always whispered, "You can't handle this," had been permanently silenced by 3 days of handling exactly that. Problems at work, conflicts with her ex-husband, financial pressures, all of these would still exist when she returned to normal life. But her perspective on their importance had fundamentally changed. The drive home through the mountains was emotional for Sarah. Every vista reminded her of the vast wilderness where she had wandered lost, but also of the beauty that had initially drawn her to photography. She knew she would return to hiking and nature photography, but with proper preparation and a healthy respect for the risks involved. Emma, sitting beside her in the passenger seat, seemed to understand her mother's contemplative mood. "Are you going to keep taking pictures in the mountains?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah replied without hesitation. "But I'm going to be a lot smarter about it. And maybe sometimes you kids can come with me." "I'd like that," Emma said, surprising her mother. "Maybe you could teach me to use the camera." The conversation made Sarah realize that her survival experience might have positive effects beyond her own personal growth. Her children had seen her handle an extreme situation successfully, demonstrating resilience and competence they had not witnessed before. That example might serve them well when they faced their own challenges. Back home in their suburban Denver neighborhood, normal life seemed almost surreal after the intensity of the survival experience. The house felt impossibly luxurious with its running water, electric lights, and central heating. Sarah found herself appreciating simple things that had been invisible before: the abundance of food in the refrigerator, the comfort of a warm bed, the security of walls and locks. But returning to routine also brought unexpected challenges. Sarah discovered that she had trouble concentrating at work, her mind frequently drifting back to memories of the wilderness. Loud sounds made her startle, and she found herself constantly checking exits and escape routes, as if her survival instincts remained hyperactive. Kim had warned her about these reactions and recommended that Sarah consider talking to a counselor who specialized in trauma recovery. Survival experiences can trigger long-term changes in how your brain processes threats, she had explained. Getting professional help isn't a sign of weakness. It's part of taking care of yourself so you can take care of your family. Sarah scheduled an appointment with therapist Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had extensive experience working with outdoor adventure guides and military veterans who had faced life-threatening situations. Their first session helped Sarah understand that her reactions were normal adaptations to extreme stress. "Your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do," Dr. Vasquez explained. "It became hypervigilant and focused on survival. Now you need to help it learn that you're safe again, that you can relax those emergency systems." The therapy sessions became an important part of Sarah's recovery process, helping her integrate the survival experience into her broader life story, rather than treating it as an isolated trauma. 3 months after her rescue, Sarah found herself standing at another trailhead, this time accompanied by Emma and Jake, while Mia stayed with Beth for a safer day at the zoo. The Denver Mountain Park system offered numerous trails within an hour of the city, challenging enough to be interesting, but well-marked and heavily trafficked enough to be safe for a family outing. Sarah's approach to hiking had changed dramatically. Her pack now contained enough emergency supplies to support 3 people overnight: sleeping bags, water purification tablets, extra food, a satellite communicator, detailed maps, and a comprehensive first aid kit. She had taken wilderness first aid training and purchased high-quality navigation equipment. More importantly, she had filed a detailed trip plan with Beth, including GPS coordinates for their intended route, emergency contact numbers, and specific instructions about when to call for help if they did not return on schedule. The level of preparation might seem excessive for a day hike on a popular trail, but Sarah would never again venture into the wilderness without proper safety margins. Emma, now 13 and increasingly interested in photography, carried her own camera, a birthday gift from Sarah, who wanted to share her passion with her daughter. Jake, still fascinated by survival stories, peppered his mother with questions about emergency procedures and wilderness skills. "What would you do if we got lost like you did?" Jake asked, as they started up the trail toward Hanging Lake. "First, we'd stop moving and stay together," Sarah replied, turning the question into a teaching moment. "Then we'd use our whistle to signal for help, just like we practiced. And if no one came, we'd make ourselves easy to find and wait for rescue instead of wandering around randomly." The hike to Hanging Lake was spectacular. and Sarah found herself relaxing as they climbed through aspen groves, showing their first hint of autumn color. The trail was crowded with other families, and the familiar rhythm of placing one foot in front of the other brought back positive memories of her photography trips. But it was Emma's reaction that made the day special. As they reached the famous waterfall and lake, Emma began photographing with an intensity that reminded Sarah of herself. "Mom, look at how the light hits the water," Emma called out. "Can you show me how to use manual settings to capture that?" Sarah spent the next hour teaching her daughter about aperture, shutter speed, and composition. Watching Emma discover the same joy in capturing natural beauty that had driven Sarah's own photography passion created a sense of continuity and healing. The wilderness that had nearly claimed Sarah's life was becoming a source of bonding with her children. Jake proved surprisingly capable on the trail, maintaining a steady pace and showing genuine interest in leave-no-trace principles. "It's like the woods are everyone's house," he said, when Sarah explained why they packed out all their trash. "You wouldn't leave garbage in someone's house, so you shouldn't leave it in the forest either." The successful family hike marked an important milestone in Sarah's recovery process. She had returned to the wilderness on her own terms, with proper preparation and appropriate companions, proving to herself that the survival experience had made her more capable rather than more fearful. Work also began taking on new meaning as Sarah applied lessons from her survival experience to professional challenges. Her job as a project manager involved coordinating complex initiatives with multiple stakeholders, tight deadlines, and limited resources. Previously, these pressures had often felt overwhelming, leading to stress and self-doubt. But after facing genuine life-or-death decisions in the wilderness, workplace problems seemed more manageable. Sarah found herself approaching crises with the same methodical thinking that had kept her alive in the forest. Assess the situation objectively, identify available resources, develop a plan, and execute it step by step without panic. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, noticed the change immediately. "You seem different since your accident," Janet observed during a performance review. "More confident, better at staying calm when things go wrong. Whatever happened out there, it seems to have made you stronger." Sarah's relationship with her ex-husband David also improved, though indirectly. David had been genuinely frightened when he learned about her disappearance, and seeing how competently she had handled the crisis seemed to reduce his tendency to criticize her decisions. During their next discussion about the children's schedules, he made an unexpected comment. "Emma told me how you survived out there," he said. "I have to admit, I'm impressed. I always thought you needed too much help with things, but I was wrong. You're tougher than I gave you credit for." The acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than she had expected. For years, David's criticism had reinforced her own self-doubts about her capability as a single parent. Having him recognize her strength helped validate the internal changes she had experienced. But the most significant ongoing impact was on Sarah's relationship with her children. The survival experience had demonstrated her competence and resilience in a way that everyday parenting never could. When conflicts arose over homework, chores, or teenage attitudes, Sarah found herself handling them with greater confidence and less anxiety. "You're different now, Mum," Emma observed one evening as they worked together on a photography project. "Like, you don't get as worried about stuff anymore." Sarah considered the observation carefully. "I think I learned that most problems aren't as big as they seem," she replied. "When you face something really serious, other things feel more manageable." The comment led to a deeper conversation about fear, courage, and growing up. Emma was beginning to face typical teenage challenges: social pressure, academic stress, questions about her future. Hearing how her mother had handled genuine fear and uncertainty provided a framework for approaching her own difficulties. Sarah also found herself becoming involved in wilderness education and safety advocacy. Marcus Rodriguez from the Mountain Rescue Team invited her to speak at a wilderness safety seminar, sharing her story as an example of both what not to do and how to survive when things go wrong.
"The goal isn't to scare people away from the outdoors," Sarah told the audience of hikers and campers.
"The goal is to help them prepare properly so they can enjoy wilderness experiences safely. I made preventable mistakes, but I also did some things right that helped me survive until rescue arrived." Her presentation covered practical topics: the importance of detailed trip plans, essential emergency gear, basic navigation skills, and mental strategies for staying calm in crisis situations. But she also emphasized the psychological preparation needed for wilderness travel. "The wilderness will test you in ways you never expected," she explained. "It's not just about having the right gear. It's about having the mental resilience to keep making good decisions when you're scared, tired, and uncomfortable." The speaking engagements led to other opportunities. Sarah began writing articles for outdoor magazines about wilderness safety, drawing on her experience to make abstract concepts more concrete and relatable. She discovered that she had a talent for explaining complex survival principles in simple terms that novice hikers could understand and apply. One article, titled "When Everything Goes Wrong, A Mother's Guide to Wilderness Survival," was picked up by several national publications and led to interview requests from hiking and adventure podcasts. Sarah was initially uncomfortable with the attention, but she recognized that sharing her story might prevent others from making similar mistakes. The writing and speaking work also provided an unexpected source of additional income. Sarah was able to reduce her work hours slightly, creating more time for family activities and personal interests. The financial security that had been a constant source of stress began to feel more manageable. A year after her rescue, Sarah received a letter from the mountain rescue team, informing her that her case had been used in a training exercise for new volunteers. The scenario, based on her experience, helped teach searchers about victim behavior, the importance of aerial reconnaissance, and coordination between ground and air teams. "Your survival decisions made our job much easier," the letter explained. "By staying in a defined area and creating effective signals, you demonstrated how lost hikers can improve their chances of being found quickly. We use your case as an example of what to do right." The letter prompted Sarah to visit the rescue team's headquarters and meet some of the volunteers who had searched for her. She learned that mountain rescue work was entirely volunteer-based, with team members giving up weekends and risking their own safety to help people like her. "This is why we do it," said volunteer Emily Chen, showing Sarah photos from various rescue operations. "When someone like you survives and goes home to their family, it makes all the training and risk worthwhile." Meeting the rescue volunteers deepened Sarah's appreciation for the community of people who made wilderness activities safer for everyone. She began volunteering for the team's fundraising activities and educational programs, finding satisfaction in supporting the organization that had saved her life. The anniversary of her rescue became an important date for reflection and gratitude. Sarah took the children back to Rocky Mountain National Park. Not to the area where she had been lost, but to easier trails where they could enjoy the beauty that had originally drawn her to wilderness photography. Standing at Bear Lake, the destination she had never reached during her fateful trip, Sarah felt a profound sense of completion. The fear and trauma of being lost had been transformed into wisdom and strength. The wilderness that had tested her so severely had ultimately given her gifts she could never have received any other way. "Are you going to take us camping sometime?" Mia asked as they watched the sunset paint the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold. Sarah smiled, considering the question carefully. "Maybe when you're a little older," she replied, "but we'll start with car camping, where there are bathrooms and rangers nearby." The laughter from her children carried across the still water, mixing with the evening sounds of the wilderness that had once seemed so threatening, but now felt like home. Sarah knew she would return to these mountains many times in the years ahead, always respectfully and well prepared, but without fear. Her survival experience had taught her that she was capable of far more than she had ever imagined. That lesson extended far beyond wilderness activities into every aspect of her life as a mother, professional, and individual. The woman who had emerged from 3 days in the forest was fundamentally different from the one who had entered it. Stronger, more confident, and deeply grateful for the simple miracle of being alive. As they drove home through the mountain darkness, Sarah reflected on the strange gift her survival experience had become. She would never recommend getting lost in the wilderness as a path to personal growth, but she could not deny the positive changes it had brought to her life. Sometimes the most difficult experiences become the most transformative, teaching lessons that could never be learned in comfort and safety. The wilderness had broken her down and built her back up again, revealing strengths she had not known she possessed and priorities she had not recognized before. In losing her way among the trees, Sarah had ultimately found herself. "Make me swallow, slowly," she whispered. The hunter replied, "Stay awake, I'm here, don't let go."